you have good fortune enough to have been in some decent films along the road. I think what I remember most about films is the people that I've worked with rather than the film itself.
He is the voice of the American West, the man who sounds like leather and tastes like whiskey. Sam Elliott didn't just play cowboys, he became the cowboy.
You cut yourself.
Thanks.
Been okay?
Yeah.
The archetype that exists somewhere between John Wayne's swagger and your grandfather's wisdom. But when he talks about the films that shaped him, that famous baritone drops to a whisper, like he's sharing secrets around a campfire. I've always been drawn to characters who say more with their silence than most people do with a speech. For Elliot, cinema wasn't about stardom or even storytelling. It was about truth. The kind of truth that comes from watching real men face real consequences, where heroism isn't about quick draws, but quiet dignity. The frames that taught him authenticity, the performances that showed him vulnerability, could coexist with strength. The movies that prove the best cowboys aren't the ones who never fall down, but the ones who know how to get back up. From dying outlaws to reluctant heroes, from comedic deflation to brutal honesty, Elliot's 6 favorite films reveal more than influences. They reveal a philosophy, because you can fake a mustache and you can fake a drawl, but you can't fake presence. Here comes Sam Elliott naming his 6 favorite movies, the films that taught him what it means to be real on screen. 6. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969.
If he invites us to stay, then we'll go.
We're gonna leave anyway.
He's got to invite us to stick around.
Hill made a Western about the end of Westerns. And for Elliot, watching Paul Newman and Robert Redford laugh their way toward inevitable doom, it was the first time he saw that cowboys could be vulnerable without surrendering their masculinity. Who are those guys? The story was elegantly simple. 2 aging outlaws find their world disappearing around them, chased by relentless lawmen and encroaching modernity. But Hill's genius wasn't in the action. It was in the friendship. The way Butch and Sundance faced extinction with humor instead of bluster. How they chose loyalty over survival. Elliot first saw it during his early struggling actor days, and it changed his understanding of what Western heroes could be. Here were men who weren't afraid to admit they were scared, who could joke about their own obsolescence, who found strength in admitting weakness. You see Butch and Sundance in every Elliot performance, where he plays the aging cowboy who knows his time has passed. The weathered rancher in The Hero, the old gunslinger in Tombstone, even his voice work as the stranger in The Big Lebowski. Hill taught him that the most powerful moments come when tough guys let their guard down. Butch Cassidy taught me that real cowboys don't hide from the truth. They face it with grace and humor. The film's final freeze frame, Butch and Sundance charging towards certain death, became Elliot's template for how men should face the end of things. Not with rage or denial, but with dignity and brotherhood. Because sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is admit you're human. 5. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962.
You put that thing up, you'll have to defend it with a gun. And you ain't exactly the type.
Ford made a movie about the death of the Old West, but he disguised it as a civics lesson. And for Elliot, watching Jimmy Stewart's tender-hearted lawyer clash with John Wayne's weathered gunfighter, it was a masterclass in the tension between myth and reality that would define his entire career. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. The story seems straightforward. An Eastern lawyer brings law and order to a frontier town, facing down the brutal outlaw Liberty Valance. But Ford's genius was in the shadows, in what wasn't said, in the way heroism could be both necessary and tragic. The film asked the hardest question about the American West. What do we lose when we become civilized? Elliot discovered it during his formative years as an actor, studying how Wayne carried the weight of a dying world on his shoulders, how he could say everything with a glance. Here was a man who knew his kind was disappearing, but couldn't stop being what he was. You see Liberty Valance in every Elliot role, where he embodies the last of something. The aging cowboy in 1883 who remembers when the frontier was truly wild. The veteran actor in A Star is Born who watches his industry change around him. The man who shot Liberty Valance taught me that sometimes being a man means accepting that your time has passed, that honor sometimes requires stepping aside for progress. Ford understood that the most powerful Westerns aren't about conquest, they're about loss. And Elliot learned that the strongest performances come from men who know they're playing a dying breed. 4. Cat Ballou, 1965.
Now, come on, now you've had a couple hours to sleep it off. Let me see what my daughter laid out $50 for.
Silverstein made a Western that laughed at Westerns without hating them. And for Elliot, watching Lee Marvin stumble around as a drunk gunfighter while Jane Fonda fought for justice, it was the first time he understood that you could honor something by poking fun at it, that reverence and humor weren't enemies. I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm good once as I ever was. The story was pure satire wrapped in genuine affection. A school teacher hires a legendary gunfighter to avenge her father's murder, only to discover her hero is a washed-up drunk who can barely stand upright. But Silverstein's genius wasn't in mocking the Western, it was in finding the humanity beneath the mythology. Elliot first encountered it early in his career, when he was still figuring out his own relationship with cowboy roles. Here was a film that deflated every Western cliché, while somehow making you love the genre even more. Marvin's kid Shalene wasn't a parody of the aging gunfighter, he was the aging gunfighter, complete with all the disappointment and dignity that came with it. You see Cat Ballou and Elliot's ability to find the humor in his own gravitas, the way he can deliver the most serious lines with just a hint of self-awareness, the knowing glances in The Big Lebowski, the gentle mockery of his own image in commercials and cameos. Cat Ballou taught me that the strongest characters are the ones who can laugh at themselves. That authenticity includes acknowledging your own absurdity, because sometimes the deepest respect comes through the gentlest ribbing. 3. The Wild Bunch, 1969.
Now, I want you to apologize to this. Yes, sir, can I help you?
Peckinpah made a Western about men who had outlived their own legend. And for Elliot, watching William Holden and his aging outlaws face their final job in a world that no longer had room for them, it was a revelation about what real cowboys look like when the cameras stopped rolling. When you side with a man, you stay with him. And if you can't do that, you're like some animal. The story was brutally simple. A gang of aging outlaws attempts one last score in 1913 as the Old West dies around them and the modern world closes in. But Peckinpah's genius wasn't in the violence, though it was revolutionary. It was in exhaustion, the way these men carried decades of choices in their shoulders, the weight of being good at something the world no longer needed. Elliot discovered it during his early days in Hollywood, when he was still learning what kind of actor he wanted to be. Here were cowboys who weren't heroic, weren't romantic, weren't even particularly likable. They were just tired men trying to stay loyal to each other in a world that had moved on without them. You see the Wild Bunch in every Elliot performance where he plays the man out of time, the aging actor and the hero confronting his own mortality, the weathered cowboy in 1883 who remembers when honor meant something different. The Wild Bunch taught me that real strength isn't about being tough. It's about being honest about how tired you are. Because sometimes the most authentic thing you can do is admit you're running on empty. 2. Shane, 1953.
I've heard about you.
What have you heard, Shane?
I've heard that you're a low-down Yankee liar.
Stevens made a Western about a gunfighter trying to escape his past. And for Elliot, watching Alan Ladd's mysterious Shane protect a homesteader family while wrestling with his own violent nature. It was the blueprint for every role he would ever play. The reluctant hero, the man who carries violence like a burden instead of a badge. A gun is a tool, Marion. No better or no worse than any other tool, an axe, a shovel, or anything. A gun is as good or as bad as the man using it. The story was archetypal in its simplicity. A lone gunfighter drifts into a valley where homesteaders are being terrorized by a cattle baron. He tries to live peacefully, but his past won't let him. When violence becomes inevitable, Shane does what he must, then disappears into the mountains, too damaged by what he's done to stay. Elliot first saw it as a young man and recognized something fundamental about masculinity on screen. Here was a hero who didn't want to be heroic, a man whose greatest strength was his reluctance to use it. Lad Shane carried his gun like a cross, each shot a small death of his soul. You see Shane in every Elliot character who protects others while protecting himself from his own capacity for violence. The aging cowboy in Tombstone who knows what war costs, the father figure in Roadhouse who fights only when everything else fails, even the narrator in The Big Lebowski who observes from a safe distance. Shane taught me that the strongest men are the ones who know the true cost of strength, that real heroes are the ones who don't want to fight. Stevens understood that the most powerful Westerns aren't about conquest, they're about sacrifice. Shane saves the valley but loses himself in the process. And Elliot learned that the most authentic performances come from men who understand that every victory leaves scars. 1. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 1948.
Well, boys, I suppose you're wondering about that money that's coming to you. The fact is, I haven't been paid off on that contract yet myself.
Houston made a movie about 3 men searching for gold in the Mexican mountains. But for Elliot, watching Humphrey Bogart's Fred Dobbs descend from decent man to paranoid monster, it was the most honest film ever made about what happens when you strip away civilization and see what men are really made of. I know what gold does to men's souls. The story was deceptively simple. 3 down-on-their-luck Americans head into the Sierra Madre to prospect for gold, guided by an old-timer who knows the mountains and the madness they breed. But Houston's genius was in the slow corruption. The way greed didn't attack like a disease, but seeped in like poison, changing good men into something unrecognizable. Elliot discovered it during his early years as an actor, when he was still learning the difference between playing tough and being real. Here was Bogart, the ultimate screen hero, playing a man who becomes genuinely despicable. No glamour, no redemption, just the ugly truth about human nature when the stakes get high enough. Walter Houston's Howard, the old prospector who understands that gold fever is a sickness, became Elliot's template for wisdom on screen. A man who's seen enough to know that the real treasure isn't what you find, it's who you remain while you're looking for it. You see Sierra Madre in every Elliot performance, where he plays the man who's learned hard lessons. The weathered wisdom in the hero, the hard-earned knowledge in A Star is Born, the understanding that comes from surviving your own mistakes. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre taught me that acting isn't about being tough, it's about being truthful, even when the truth is ugly. Houston showed Elliot that the camera could see through pretense, that authenticity was the only currency that mattered on screen. Because gold fades, but truth endures. And there it is. 6 films that didn't just teach Elliot how to act, they taught him how to be. Not the flashy choices, but the honest ones. The films that proved real men aren't afraid to show their scars, their doubts, their humanity. Now you know what shaped the legend. What shapes you?